It's that picture-perfect morning. Sun's out, birds chirping, little town in Connecticut, kids heading off to school, laughter in the air, December chill. You can almost feel it.
Yeah.
But under that totally normal surface, something was really wrong. Really terrifyingly wrong. Actually, something ready to explode with unimaginable violence and just shatter the innocence of that whole quiet place forever.
Yeah, that contrast is...
Welcome to QuickCasters, by the way, the podcast that jumps headfirst into these complex events and brings you, the listener, the understanding you need. And we do it fast.
Quickly.
If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives like this into the stories that really matter.
Yeah, we cut through all the noise and get you that essential knowledge without all the extra stuff you don't need.
Exactly.
Yeah. So today...
Tough one.
It's a tough one, but it's vital we talk about it.
Right.
We're diving into December 14th, 2012, Newtown, Connecticut.
A day seared into our collective memory.
Absolutely. And we're focusing on a YouTube documentary called El Día que Ocurrió la Masacre de Sandy Hook. It's on the channel El Día.
Powerful title. Gets right to the point.
It does. And look, we're not here to re-traumatize or sensationalize.
Yeah, this isn't about shock value.
Not at all. The goal is to understand how all these factors came together and turned a normal morning in a seemingly idyllic town into a scene of just unspeakable tragedy.
To give our listeners a clearer picture of what happened and why it matters.
Precisely.
Right at the center of this story is Adam Lanza.
The shooter.
Born in Kingston, New Hampshire, April 2010, 1992. Early life seemed pretty comfortable on the surface, financially stable family.
The kind of background you wouldn't immediately associate with this level of violence.
Exactly. But as we often find out, outward appearances can be really misleading. Even when Adam was a student himself at Sandy Hook Elementary, there were signs that he was facing some serious challenges, challenges that went way beyond normal kid stuff. What jumped out at you from those early observations?
It's the consistency of the reports that really strikes me. Teachers and classmates, they all mention this heightened sensitivity to sensory input. Loud noises, sudden movements, even in a structured classroom setting, it seemed to really get to him.
Like he was hyper-aware of everything.
Yes, and even those normal transitions between activities, something most kids handle pretty easily, those caused him a lot of anxiety.
Like the change was unsettling.
Exactly. And socially, he was very withdrawn, struggled to connect with other kids, preferred to be alone, isolated.
And if we step back and look at this bigger picture, these weren't just little quirks or personality traits. They suggest something deeper going on, something different about how he was processing the world around him.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to his diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome at age 13.
That's considered part of the autism spectrum.
Right, so this diagnosis gave some explanation for his challenges. But the attempts to manage those challenges with medication, it didn't go so well because of the side effects.
Yeah, medication can be a real trial and error process. And with a diagnosis like Asperger's, finding the right balance is crucial.
Especially for a young person who's already struggling.
Absolutely.
And it seems like despite being in therapy, the overall family support system, it might not have been as strong as Adam needed.
That's a crucial point.
His dad, Peter, was reportedly very focused on his work, and his older brother, Ryan, was often away from home.
Leaving Adam mostly in the care of his mother, Nancy.
And that brings us to another crucial figure in this story.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the connection between a diagnosis like Asperger's and the family environment, the support or lack of it that's available?
It's a critical interaction. While Asperger's does present unique challenges with social interaction and processing sensory information, the impact of those challenges, it can be greatly influenced by the support systems around that person.
Makes sense.
A close-knit, understanding family can be essential. They provide that extra layer of support and guidance.
Like a safety net almost.
Exactly, but the picture we're getting here, it suggests maybe that support was fragmented.
Not as solid as it could have been.
Right, and that might have made it even harder for Adam to deal with social and emotional situations.
So Adam's mother, Nancy Lanza, she plays a huge and ultimately tragic role in this story. She was really into firearms.
This wasn't just a casual hobby.
No. She took both of her sons to shooting ranges regularly, and she was even involved in events organized by the NRA.
Which, given what happened, takes on a whole different meaning.
It's a chilling detail when you look back on it.
Yeah, it makes you think.
And here's where things get really disturbing. Adam learned to use firearms at a young age.
Way too young, some would say.
Absolutely. So when you consider his vulnerabilities, the challenges he was already dealing with, what do you think about that early exposure to guns?
It's a recipe for disaster, frankly. When you've got an individual who's already having trouble regulating their emotions, difficulty with social interactions, and then you give them easy access to lethal weapons, it's a volatile mix.
The risks are just amplified.
Massively. Now, of course, responsible gun ownership is a thing. Many people do it safely. But in this specific context, Nancy Lanza's interest in firearms, it unintentionally provided the very tools that would be used in this horrible event.
Tragic irony.
It really highlights how important it is to consider individual risk factors when we're talking about access to firearms.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the guns themselves, it's about the people who have access to them.
Now, as Adam went through school, his academic performance, it started to become really inconsistent,
He'd have these periods of high achievement. He even made the honor roll in 2007.
showing that potential was there.
Definitely. But at the same time, his social isolation, it just kept getting worse.
He couldn't make those meaningful connections with his peers,
Yeah.
and it seemed like the social pressures of adolescence, it was just amplifying everything he was already struggling with.
That's a common pattern, unfortunately.
Yeah, and eventually his attendance at Newton High School, it became really spotty, and he ended up dropping out.
Another red flag.
It's interesting that this period of decline academically and socially, it coincided with a big shift in his family life. What was going on there and what impact do you think it had? And by the way, if you're finding this deep dive helpful and you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Right. So the breakdown of the family unit, it seems like a major turning point. Adam's parents, they divorced in 2009. His dad, Peter, moved out. And then shortly after, his brother, Ryan, left home for work.
Leaving Adam alone with his mother.
And what's particularly striking is how Nancy became increasingly protective of Adam during this time.
Understandable as a parent.
Of course, it's a natural reaction, but it ended up further isolating them both within their own home.
Like they were withdrawing into themselves.
Exactly. Even though they lived in a pretty safe area, that inward focus, it created this bubble, an environment where Adam's problems might have gone unnoticed.
Hidden from view.
Yes.
So it was within this increasingly isolated world that Adam's life took a dark, dark turn. By 2006, he wasn't receiving any medical help, no therapy.
No outside intervention at all.
And inside the house, shielded from the outside world, his thoughts and his fixations, they became really disturbing. In the 2 years before the shooting, he basically shut himself in his room.
Self-imposed isolation.
Yeah. He spent almost all of his time there. And it wasn't like he was studying or working. He was covering his bedroom window with black garbage bags.
Shutting out the light.
Literally creating this artificial darkness. And his communication with his own mother, even within the same house, it became incredibly limited.
Like they were living in separate worlds.
He would email her sometimes, even though they were just down the hall from each other. What does that tell us about his state of mind?
That level of withdrawal, it's a huge red flag. I mean, transforming your living space into this darkened, secluded zone, it's a profound retreat from the outside world.
A complete disconnect.
And the fact that communication with his own mother had broken down to the point of emailing each other within the same house, that speaks volumes about the state of their relationship and the emotional distance that had grown between them.
It's like the foundation of their family had just crumbled.
It really had.
And in this self-created isolation, Adam's obsessions, they grew more fixated and more disturbing. His primary focus became violence, and specifically the study of school massacres.
A deeply troubling fixation.
He researched these events meticulously, both in the U.S. and internationally. He was gathering a huge amount of information online.
Like he was obsessed.
Two events in particular seemed to hold this morbid fascination for him. The Columbine High School shooting in 1999.
Which sadly became a blueprint for so many copycat attacks.
And then the Northern Illinois University shooting in 2008.
Another horrific event.
And it wasn't just a surface-level interest. He was digging deep into the details, the tactics, the weapons used, the timelines.
The mechanics of the violence.
Disturbingly, it seems like he started to develop this twisted sense of connection, even sympathy. For the perpetrators, he seemed to believe that they were somehow protecting children from harmful adults.
A deeply distorted and dangerous rationalization.
What are the psychological implications when someone becomes so intensely focused on these kinds of events?
It's a huge warning sign. This kind of fascination with past massacres, it can point to a process of identification with the perpetrators.
Like he's trying to see himself in them.
Exactly, and it's a way of seeking validation for his own violent thoughts, however warped that validation might be.
So he's justifying it in his own mind.
In a way, yes. And the fact that he was studying the mechanics so closely, it suggests a level of planning and a really unhealthy preoccupation with how to carry out extreme violence.
Killing.
And the idea that he was empathizing with the motives of these killers, no matter how twisted those motives were, it shows a complete breakdown in his understanding of right and wrong, a real detachment from reality.
Like his moral compass was shattered.
Exactly.
We get more insight into Adam's inner world by looking at his online activities. Despite his physical isolation, he was using internet forums as his main way of interacting socially.
The internet can be a lifeline for people who struggle with face-to-face interactions, but it can also be a dangerous echo chamber for harmful ideas.
Right, and around 2010, he connected with a woman online, an anonymous user.
Through these digital exchanges, he started to share his darkest thoughts and obsessions.
And this online confidant, she later gave some incredibly revealing and disturbing information to the FBI.
Her insights were crucial to understanding Adam's mental state.
She described him as intelligent, but completely consumed by pessimism and prone to depression. She also mentioned his unusual sleep patterns, like 12 hours at a time, and his struggles with anorexia.
Which further highlights the extent of his psychological distress and his disconnect from his own physical well-being.
Yeah, and maybe most disturbingly, she told the FBI about his twisted views on child abuse. He even expressed the belief that relationships between adults and children could be mutually beneficial.
A deeply disturbing and harmful perspective.
So when you look at this online interaction, what does it tell you about his psychological state, his connection to reality? And if you're finding this examination of Adam Lanza's background crucial to understanding this tragedy, please consider subscribing to QuickCasters on YouTube.
Well, this online interaction, it gives us this chilling glimpse into his internal world, a world that was hidden behind his physical withdrawal, the combination of his intelligence and these deeply disturbing beliefs. It's really unsettling.
A dangerous mix.
And the fact that he had anorexia, that's another sign of his psychological distress and how detached he was from his own body's needs. And then you add his views on child abuse.
Yeah.
It suggests a really warped understanding of relationships and morality.
So it seems like all these dark thoughts, his fixations, they all culminated in this horrific decision. Adam decided to commit a mass killing on December 14th. And it seems like he saw this act as his way to achieve notoriety, a twisted kind of fame.
The desire for infamy, it's a common thread among mass shooters.
Tragically, he would achieve this in the most devastating way imaginable. On the morning of the shooting after 9 a.m., he woke up, got dressed all in black, and went to the room where his mother kept her guns.
Deliberate, methodical.
He took a Bushmaster rifle, model XM15 E2S, 2 pistols, an ISM SAA-12 semi-automatic shotgun, a lot of ammunition.
He was prepared.
He also put on a green utility vest and took a Savage Mark 2.22 rifle.
Like he was gearing up for a mission.
What does this level of preparation tell us about his mindset in those final hours?
I mean, it all points to a premeditated act. The selection of weapons, the ammunition, the vest. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was the culmination of a long and deeply disturbing process of planning and intent.
And before leaving the house, he confronted his mother, Nancy.
A chilling turn of events.
Reports say she'd mentioned the possibility of moving, maybe hoping that a change of scenery would help Adam.
But of course, that move would never happen.
Her youngest son went into her bedroom and shot her 4 times in the head.
Unimaginable.
Her body was found later lying on her bed. What do you make of this initial act of violence against his own mother?
I think this act of killing his own mother, it's a terrifying preview of what was to come. It demonstrates a complete breakdown of those fundamental social and family bonds, a total disregard for human life.
Like he was severing those ties.
And tragically, it also shows how the very means that Nancy Lanza had acquired for self-defense were turned against her and would soon be turned against others.
It's a terrible irony.
It really is.
With his mother dead, Adam took her car, loaded it with all those weapons, and drove a short distance, just about 8 kilometers to his target, Sandy Hook Elementary School.
His former school.
The place where he had been a student. Why target that specific place?
It's a haunting choice, and it suggests a possible, though unconfirmed, connection to his past. It could indicate unresolved issues. Maybe he saw the school as a symbol of his earlier struggles, or perhaps there was a desire to inflict the most trauma in a place associated with innocence and vulnerability.
So by this time, Sandy Hook had implemented some security measures. Visitors had to buzz in and be identified through a camera. But Adam, he bypassed all that with brutal efficiency, wearing yellow earplugs. He used the Bushmaster rifle to shoot out the glass next to the main doors. Those first gunshots were a terrifying alarm to everyone inside.
Shattering the peace of that morning.
What impact do you think those initial sounds had on the staff and students?
Those first shots, they would have instantly destroyed any sense of safety and normalcy. For the staff, it would have triggered immediate action, emergency protocols kicking in. But for the children, those sudden violent sounds, they would have been terrifying, utterly incomprehensible.
A sudden intrusion of chaos.
Yes, a clear signal that something was terribly wrong.
Inside, around 9:35 a.m., unimaginable chaos started unfolding in the main hallway. Principal Don Hochsprung, school psychologist Mary Sherlock, and assistant principal Natalie Hammond. They encountered Adam. They had been in a meeting and they bravely ran towards the sound of the gunshots.
Incredible courage.
According to one survivor, they even yelled a warning, "Shooter, be careful," before Lanza opened fire, killing Hochsprung, and Sherlock Hammond was also shot and wounded. But thankfully, she survived. Lanza kept moving through the school. What do you think this initial confrontation tells us about the staff at Sandy Hook?
The immediate actions of Principal Hochsprung, Mary Sherlock, and Natalie Hammond, they show incredible heroism. Their instinct was to run towards danger, to try and protect the children, and to even warn the attacker despite the immense risk. It's a testament to their dedication and bravery.
They were facing pure evil with incredible courage.
Absolutely.
So as those shots echoed through the school, other staff members, they reacted incredibly quickly to protect the children in the library. Yvonne and Marianne Jacob hid 18 students in a simulation alert area. In the basement, the school nurse, Sarah Cox, and the secretary, Barbara Hallstein, they hid in a first aid closet and whispering, they called 911. The custodian, Rick Tercio, bravely tried to lock down classrooms.
So many acts of selfless bravery.
And then there's the incredible story of first grade teacher Kaitlin Roig. When she heard the gunfire, she immediately got her 15 students into the small bathroom in her classroom. The windows were too small to escape through and the hallway was too dangerous. They huddled together in that tiny space, and Kaitlin told her students, "Know that I love you all very much." She thought those might be her last words.
Heartbreaking.
More gunshots, closer this time. But as Kaitlin later described a small detail, a black piece of paper covering the window on their classroom door might have been what saved them. Lanza paused at their door, but then he moved on. He didn't realize Kaitlin and her terrified, silent students were inside.
An incredible stroke of luck.
What do these stories of bravery tell us about how people respond in extreme situations?
I think they show the extraordinary capacity for courage and selflessness that emerges in moments of crisis. The quick thinking and decisive actions of the staff at Sandy Hook, they undoubtedly saved lives.
They put the children's safety above their own.
And Kaitlin Roig's story in particular is incredibly moving. It highlights the human instinct to protect the vulnerable even when facing unimaginable danger. These stories remind us of the profound dedication of educators and the unexpected ways that survival can hinge on the smallest details.
But tragically, despite those acts of heroism, not everyone could be saved. Lanza entered another first-grade classroom where the substitute teacher, Lauren Rousseau, was trying to protect her 16 students along with the assistant teacher, Rachel Diavino, who just started working at the school. Lanza opened fire, and the result was devastating. 14 children were killed instantly, and one was critically wounded. Only one child in that classroom managed to hide and survive.
Horrific.
Lanza then went to Victoria Soto's classroom. She had hidden some of her students in the bathroom, a closet, and under desks, but Lanza found 4 of them and started shooting. Victoria Soto, with unbelievable bravery, tried to shield them with her own body. She sacrificed her life to protect those children in that same classroom. Was Mary Murphy, an assistant teacher who worked with students with disabilities. She was focused on protecting one student in particular, a little boy named Dylan. Both Mary and Dylan were murdered. These details are incredibly difficult to hear. What do these acts of violence show us about the shooter's intent?
The details are horrific, and they highlight the brutality and indiscriminate nature of this attack, targeting defenseless children, and the teachers who are trying to save them. It's a level of cruelty that's hard to comprehend, and the fact that the teachers continue to try to protect their students, even when facing certain deaths, is a powerful testament to their love and dedication.
So the sound of gunfire, the screams, it spread through the school, creating this atmosphere of terror.
Pure panic.
Even though teachers like Kaitlin had taken action to secure their classrooms, the fear was that no one was safe. And it was around this time that law enforcement started to arrive. Newtown police got there first at about 9:39 a.m. They were quickly followed by Connecticut State Police, who were better equipped to handle a situation like this. They had specialized units, trained dogs, and within minutes a police helicopter was overhead. What were some of the challenges law enforcement would have faced when they arrived at this horrific scene?
Arriving at an active shooter situation in a school It's one of the most complex and high-pressure scenarios imaginable for law enforcement. The immediate priorities are to neutralize the threat, secure the area, and provide medical aid to the injured. But doing all of that in a chaotic environment with potentially wounded and traumatized people while also trying to find and confront the shooter, it's incredibly challenging. The need for speed and decisive action has to be balanced with the safety of everyone involved, the officers and the potential victims.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It really is.
Lanza, having studied past school shootings, seemed to know that police would be coming soon. He went to classroom 10, took out a Glock 20 SF pistol, and at 9:40 a.m. he shot himself in the head, just like so many of the school shooters he had researched and seemed to identify with. He was only 20 years old. His body was found by officers who entered the classroom shortly after. The timeline is so compressed, it all happened so fast.
What does that tell us about the speed and finality of violence like this? The incredibly short time frame from the first shots to the shooter's suicide, it emphasizes just how quickly these tragedies can unfold. It underscores the limited time for intervention once an attack like this begins, and it really stresses the importance of prevention efforts.
Right, trying to stop these tragedies before they happen.
Absolutely.
So in the aftermath, shock, grief, and disbelief just swept over the school and the entire town.
It's hard to even imagine.
Emergency responders and law enforcement began the awful process of evacuating the school. Classroom by classroom, officers had to carefully identify themselves at each closed door to reassure the terrified students and staff.
Can't imagine the trauma.
Kaitlin Roig, understandably, refused to leave the bathroom with her students until she was absolutely sure they were safe.
That's a powerful image of the lasting fear.
Once the school was empty, law enforcement did a second sweep of the entire building, just in case there were other attackers. And while medics were treating the wounded tragically, 2 more children and 1 adult died at the hospital in just 11 minutes. 26 lives were taken, 6 adults and 20 young children. The national response was immediate and overwhelming. President Obama addressed the nation expressing the collective heartbreak and calling for action. The superintendent of schools in Newtown made the difficult decision to keep Sandy Hook students out of that building until the new year, temporarily moving them to another school.
A community forever changed.
And if you're watching on YouTube and this detailed account is helping you understand the gravity of this tragedy, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to QuickCasters for more in-depth explorations.
We appreciate your support.
So the police investigation, it began right away. The main goals were to identify the shooter and try to understand his motivations. They found the weapons quickly, in Lanza's car and at the family home where his mother's body was also found. But the early stages of the investigation were confusing. There was a lot of misinformation. An ID card found on Adam belonged to his brother, Ryan Lanza, who lived in New Jersey.
Leading to a lot of initial confusion.
Yes, exactly. This led to Ryan being questioned intensely by local police, Connecticut state officials, the FBI. They thought he might have been involved, but Ryan was cleared after he explained he hadn't had any contact with his brother since 2010. But he did give investigators important details about Adam's declining mental health and how he had become increasingly reclusive. Adam's father, Peter Lanza, was also interviewed, and he was in total shock and disbelief. It wasn't until a year after the shooting that he publicly said he believed Adam had a more severe mental illness than Asperger's, maybe schizophrenia or another serious psychotic disorder. Forensic analysis of Adam's body showed no signs of illegal drugs, and an autopsy that looked for any physical abnormalities in his brain that might explain his violence. It didn't find anything significant. What do these initial findings tell us about how difficult it is to understand and prevent these tragedies?
Well, the mix-up with the ID, it shows just how chaotic things were in the immediate aftermath and how hard it was for investigators to piece together what happened. The interviews with family members gave some crucial background on Adam's struggles, but in the end, a clear-cut, easily explained motive, it just wasn't there.
It's a frustrating reality in these cases.
Absolutely. And the fact that Adam's father later speculated about a more serious mental illness, it underscores how complex it is to diagnose and understand these deep psychological problems even after the fact.
And the lack of any physical abnormalities in the autopsy, it further emphasizes the focus on psychological and behavioral factors in this case.
The mind can be a dark and difficult place to understand.
So a major part of the investigation centered on the stuff Adam had collected about other school shootings. Investigators found downloaded videos of the Columbine massacre and even disturbing videos of suicides committed with firearms.
A window into his obsessions.
But in a huge setback for the investigation, they couldn't recover any more data from Adam's computer because the hard drive was missing. Investigators believe he deliberately destroyed it.
It makes you wonder what was on that hard drive, what other clues it might have held.
It's a frustrating dead end. And despite months of interviews with family, neighbors, even the woman he talked to, online investigators couldn't pinpoint one single motive for the massacre. Forensic psychiatrist James Knoll. He suggested that Lanza might have been overwhelmed by unbearable psychological pain and was trying to transfer that pain to the families of his victims.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. The official report on the shooting came out in November 2013. It concluded that Adam Lanza acted alone and the case was officially closed. But that wasn't the end of the story for the victims' families or the community.
No. The impact of this tragedy goes far beyond the official investigation.
And tragically, the Sandy Hook massacre became a target for the worst kind of misinformation and exploitation. Alex Jones, the guy behind the far-right media outlet InfoWars, he relentlessly pushed a conspiracy theory that the whole event was a hoax staged by the Obama administration as a way to take people's guns.
A truly reprehensible claim.
He even went so far as to say that no one actually died at Sandy Hook.
Adding insult to unimaginable injury.
These outrageous and completely false claims caused even more pain for the victims' families, who are already dealing with the worst kind of loss in 2021. 8 of those families, along with an FBI agent who was there that day, they filed a defamation lawsuit against Jones. They wanted justice. And in 2022, a jury found Jones liable for defamation and ordered him to pay nearly $1 billion to the families. What impact do you think this kind of widespread disinformation has on the victims of these tragedies and on society's ability to learn from them?
The spread of these malicious conspiracy theories, it's like a second wave of trauma for the victims and their families. It's incredibly harmful, and it undermines not only them, but also our collective understanding of what happened. It makes it harder to have honest conversations about preventing future tragedies. And while the legal outcome in the Alex Jones case was a victory for the families, it can't truly undo the damage that was done.
The scars run deep.
They do.
And if you're watching on YouTube, please share your thoughts about this in the comments below.
We'd love to hear from you.
The effects of the Sandy Hook massacre are far-reaching and profound. We have to remember the survivors, the children and the adults who went through that horrible day, even after they went back to school. The psychological scars remained. Just being in a classroom could trigger anxiety and flashbacks, and this trauma, it affected everyone, the children, the teachers, all the adults who witnessed or were affected by the violence.
It ripples outward.
While many of them received support and showed incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable horror, every time there's another school shooting, it brings those terrible memories and feelings back to the surface.
It reopens the wounds.
Kaitlin Roig, the first-grade teacher who hid her students in the bathroom, she's become a symbol of survival and hope. She wrote a book about her experience called Choosing Hope, and she's become an advocate for gun safety and trauma recovery. And incredibly, she stayed close with many of the children she protected that day. What do you think the long-term impact on survivors tells us about the nature of trauma?
I think it shows that trauma is a deeply personal and enduring experience. Events like this, they can leave scars that last for years, even decades. Kaitlin Roig's story, it's a powerful example of resilience and the human capacity for healing, but it also highlights the need for ongoing support and understanding for those who have experienced such horrific events.
And tragically, despite the horror of Sandy Hook and all the discussion it sparked, it didn't prevent other school shootings in the United States. Just in 2023 alone, there were confirmed incidents in at least 29 states. The events in Newtown, they reignited the debate about gun control in 2021. President Biden tried to push through some legislative changes, things like enhanced background checks, measures to keep guns away from domestic abusers, community-based violence intervention programs.
It seems like there was some momentum for change.
But ultimately, like so many times before, those efforts stalled because of political gridlock. And with Donald Trump back in the White House, it's unlikely that any major new gun control laws will be passed anytime soon. In fact, in February 2025, his administration ordered a review of all the existing gun regulations in the U.S., given this political landscape. How do you feel about the chances of preventing future tragedies like this one?
It's discouraging. The fact that school shootings continue to happen even after the tragedy of Sandy Hook, it's a stark reminder of how difficult it is to address gun violence in the United States, the political divisions, the lack of meaningful action. It leaves a lot of people feeling frustrated and worried about the future.
So as we reflect on this tragedy, the complex factors that contributed to it, Adam Lanza's psychological struggles, his easy access to guns, the broader societal issues surrounding violence, it raises a fundamental question. What single fundamental change in our society do you believe has the best chance of actually preventing future acts of this kind of horrific violence? And what would it take to make that change happen on a large scale in a way that lasts?
It's a question that demands serious thought and action.
If you're watching on YouTube, please share your thoughts about this in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you found this deep dive into the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting informative and important, please hit that subscribe button for more in-depth explorations of significant events here on QuickCasters.
Subscribe and give me a like. Subscribe.